My name is Felicia Rubenstein. I'm the founder of HAYVN, and I just want to welcome all of you to our session today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we are doing this. So sustainability and social impact are near and dear to HAYVN's heart. We are a B Corp and went through the process during COVID, and it's just so important to be thoughtful in this world of sustainability and social impact. And our goal is to be a hub to there's so many great things happening in the state and in the country to focus on this and to be a hub for people in Connecticut to come to and share ideas. So with that in mind, some of our members have helped curate these sessions that we're putting together, and Lisa Miniter, who's here, has been spearheading these monthly sessions on different topics.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and as well virtually via Zoom. We're here today, as Felicia said, and it's another sustainability event. It's something that doesn't get much exposure in the media, and in particular, it seems like from the industry side for the consumer. Many of us are consumers, but you'll hear through the lens of also the B2B side. And broadly speaking, this is the global resale category. We're calling it refashioning the future of fashion with conscious consumption. And so with that, within this sector, we'll learn about a myriad of different ways that tie in with the tenets of responsible fashion. It's kind of a multiplier that both Haley and Laurine will talk about, as well as living a low waste lifestyle, a low waste energy related lifestyle. And so with that, we have our two speakers. We're going to start with Haley. Haley is a leading expert in sustainability, textiles, and the fashion industry. Her background started actually as a costume designer and a stylist. She then moved to being into, for major publishers, she worked as a fashion consultant from a history standpoint. Then she burnished her entrepreneurial chops with starting what's called Shop, opened up kind of incubator startup ecosystem specific to climate tech. She's going to run all that. And then next to her is Laurine. Laurine is an operations and design strategist. She also is an expert in supply chain specific to sustainability and how that also extends to ethics. Her background started with business change management and then moved over to sustainable product development. She then kind of went over a different path and headed up studio operations for Vera Wang. And most recently, she's on the senior consulting capacity with a myriad of different disciplines, meaning operations, again, design strategy.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to actually start by saying that I think community and relationships are at the heart of what we do, and particularly in the space of sustainability, of conscious consumption, we need to all be working together, which is why I'm so happy to see so many of you in this room.
Sure, we are.
As a HAYVN Hatch presenter. It was the very beginning of my startup journey in sustainable fashion. And thanks to the support of the HAYVN team, I really think that I felt like I had the support and the network to move forward and to take this sort of dream and this idea in the sustainable fashion space of creating an online hand-me-down network. That dream became a reality. And I owe a huge amount of thanks to Felicia and the team for helping give me that very early platform back in 2018. So today we're here to talk about the principles of responsible fashion. What it means, why we need it, why it's important, and who is participating in this industry, both in terms of like the big players and stakeholders, and also what type of consumer and individual is participating. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, we will all want to participate in this in some ways. So the 5 main principles of responsible fashion are refuse, reduce, repair, reuse, recycle. During today's presentation, I will touch on all of these points, but we are really going to get very in-depth, the two of us, on the reuse and recycle portion, because what happens to our clothes after we no longer have a need for them, or after they're manufactured, is really what takes the greatest toll on the environment. So broadly, what does refuse mean? Refuse means basically just say no. We used to say just say no to drugs, right? In the 90s, it's just say no. If you have the opportunity to be given stuff, given clothing, buy new stuff, a lot of the times this comes up in the case of like swag or merch. The more we can say no, thank you, the less it will be produced in the future, and the less burden it will have on the environment. Reduce. Reduce is one of the most important tenets as well. Reduce means simply buy less and buy well. We don't need all of the clothes that are in our closets. We're going to get deep into those stats in a minute. Repair. This is one of my personal favorites. Take good care of the things that you have. First, you have to buy those clothes that are in the type of clothes that are made well enough to repair them. Then hold on to them for long enough so you can actually like take those shoes to the cobbler or mend that sweater by yourself. This is a very important thing that we do in our family. I've got 2 little kids. I've got 5.5-year-old twins. And when they run in the door after they've ripped a sweater, a pair of leggings, they get excited because it means an opportunity to like take out the thread and take out patches and take out some really fun stuff and basically like bedazzle what they have instead of, sort of tossing it. Reuse and recycle. This is really what Laurine is going to be speaking about. But these are two very important principles, because what happens to our clothes at the end of their life cycle is, as I said before, has the most consequences on the environment. We're going to talk about why. So why do I call it responsible? We've all heard these terms before, and some of these terms are in fashion and out of fashion. When I first started actually teaching sustainable fashion, if I put in quotes, that word wasn't even a term. This was in like 2014. I taught at University of Bridgeport and Sacred Heart. I was calling it green fashion. We never hear that word anymore, right? Maybe we hear like green building, but green fashion is not a thing. It then became sustainable fashion. Now, for those of us in the sustainable fashion space, working as professionals, I can't say that word with a straight face, because those 2 words are an oxymoron combined. Fashion with a capital F, it speaks to an industry, and an industry that is embedded in overproduction. Whereas sustainability means being more thoughtful and less wasteful with the natural resources that we have. So this now takes us to conscious consumption. I like to use that term. So I like to say that I am in the space of conscious consumption for fashion, or I like to say that I'm in the space of conscious consumption in the fashion world. Who knows? But what it means is that we're being more thoughtful about the ways in which we're buying and spending when it comes to our clothing choices. Circular is not the same thing, although it has been used. It's a term that's becoming more and more used more frequently, but I just want to dispel some myths about the word circular. So circular is in contrast to linear. The linear fashion model starts at the place of take, where we take natural resources, we deplete them in the manufacturing process, and then we make clothes using an immense amount of energy, water, and chemicals to ultimately make those clothes which we will or will not wear, but ultimately will have an end of life point, generally in a landfill, because they will generally be tossed. So approximately 70% of fashion's greenhouse gas emissions come from that production process. So when we talk about circular economies, it is the contrast to this linear fashion model of take, make, waste. And it looks a lot like this. There are many permutations of circular economies within the fashion cycle. I'll just give 2, for example. One is that clothes are designed to last. Then they are also designed to then they go through a process where they are reused. And then they sort of come back around and they are recycled again. So it's almost like a hand-me-down network or a hand-me-down swirl, you could think about it, right? I buy clothing, I pass it on to somebody else, they wear it for a period of time, then it's passed on to the next person, and then so on and so forth. Another principle of circular fashion is making clothes that are designed out of circular materials. So using fibers that are constructed in a way that can ultimately be downcycled or upcycled into a second life within that next round of material. So why is this all important? Why is it important to understand how to live a more sustainable and conscientious lifestyle when it comes to our clothing consumption? Well, first of all, everybody wears clothes. In the US alone, there has been a 400% increase of spend on clothing compared to the 80s, a 400% increase. So whereas the model of consumption in the 80s and 90s was very much like buy less, buy well, make it last. You know, I think about the way that sort of my parents taught me to buy clothes, right? It was like you get a couple of nice things and you hold on to them and you live in them. It has now completely been upended by, of course, the rise in fast fashion, the rise in sort of YouTube quick trends, TikTok quick trends, like everything with social media perpetuating the idea that something is in and out within a day. So 500 million clothing items are produced every year in North America. That is a huge number, especially if we consider that 80% of the contents of one's closet go unworn. So that means that 20% of our clothes are the things that we primarily wear. 80% generally go unworn and they sit and they become waste. That amounts to, in the US alone, 9 billion articles of clothing sitting dormant in our closets. So that not only takes up space, but we can imagine what that looks like in terms of waste, in terms of landfill mass. 36 billion clothes are discarded annually in the US. So we're seeing this sort of pipeline, right? We're overproducing, we're over-consuming. We have so much stuff in our closets, but we're wearing actually a very small amount of it, which amounts to a lot of disposal. So the average family disposes of 280 pounds a year of clothing and textiles. 280 pounds a year. 85% of the clothing ends up in landfill and 15% of that is repurposed. Laurine is going to talk very specifically about these numbers, but it's really important to understand that there's a very small percentage, it's probably even smaller than 15%, but we only have this data right now, of clothing that can actually be repurposed. This is the stat that got me working very hard, developing companies, helping to scale other companies in the sustainable fashion space. And it is this, that 12% or less of clothing donated in the US is actually sold in those thrift stores when we're talking about the mass chain thrift stores like Goodwill or Salvation Army. So the idea that there's this very altruistic process where one can just sort of buy clothes at will and then donate them when they no longer have need for them, and that becomes part of an altruistic cycle is a myth. In fact, the remaining clothes become somebody else's problem when we really created the problem ourselves. This is where the importance of secondhand comes in. So secondhand is the way that I personally participate in creating a more sustainable fashion ecosystem. 82% of carbon emissions are saved by buying just one thing secondhand. Extending the life of a garment is perhaps the most important thing that we can do if and when we are going to buy clothes. So if we start off with the principles of refuse, which means just don't buy it all, but we recognize that we need clothes, right? We're all gonna wear clothes. So refuse the things that we don't need. Then reduce the impact by buying well, buying less, repairing the things that we have. And then, once we have those things, looking at the ways that we can properly recycle them, donate them, be responsible about their next life. And the primary way that I think we can do our part is by shopping secondhand when we do need that new purchase, and giving our clothes away to people, to humans, or even, and donating them so that they can be reworn. So the equivalent of one secondhand item purchased every year is the equivalent of 66 million trees planted, 1.25 billion showers, and 18,700 garbage trucks full of waste. If we just replaced one retail item with a secondhand item every year. And here's what that looks like. And also I should say that I will like happily share this slideshow with anyone.
Do you have sources for the stats you're using?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, obviously you do, but what I mean is, what are they?
So a lot of, actually, right here, so a lot of the slides will have sources. This is a great resource. It's actually the ThredUp resale report. So ThredUp is an online reseller. I think they call themselves the largest online thrift store. And ThredUp for the last 11 years has put out a resale report. They were really the first to do it. So we have to, I always look at it with a grain of salt because it's skewed towards presenting resale in a very positive framework, but it is positive for the most part. So this stat is from ThredUp, and a lot of these graphics that you will see are as well. So this shows the amount of carbon emissions, or we can really think of it as like a carbon footprint of one new clothing item, which is in orange, compared to one used clothing item, which is in green. And look at those results. The differences are huge in terms of CO2 emissions, energy demand, and water use. When it comes to water use, for example, it takes 4,000 liters of water to make one pair of jeans. 4,000 liters. So just imagine if we replace buying those, the new jeans with the secondhand jeans, which are, by the way, very easy to find online. You just type in the brand and you type in
the thrift shop.
Yeah, and in the thrift shop, exactly. They're everywhere, right? Denim is everywhere. No need to buy them new. Buy them secondhand, and look at all that we will be saving in greenhouse gas emissions, energy, and water use. Okay, secondhand growth is growing. When I talk about the growth in the secondhand market, I mean between thrift stores, consignment stores, secondhand marketplaces, e-com, etc. The primary consumers in this space are millennials and Gen Z, but Gen X, baby boomers are absolutely getting into this space as well. Secondhand no longer has the stigma that it does. People are buying secondhand everything from Lululemon to H&M to Hermes. And there's a lot of growth happening in the space as well. There will be 60% of new shoppers entering the space of secondhand shopping by 2027. It is a booming space. Online secondhand markets are projected to be the value of $90 billion by 2032. So this green chunk over here, this shows just what proportion of one's closet by 2032 will be made up of secondhand. And so that's the majority. At the top is off price, and actually next is secondhand, anywhere from shopping from ThredUp, the thrifts on a thrift store, the Real, Goodwill, etc. Then this is direct to consumer, value chains, etc. Now, I want to hand the presentation over to my colleague, who's going to speak very specifically and with great knowledge and detail about the space of the secondhand markets, particularly what that supply chain looks like, and why it is so critical that we buy less, that we buy better, and that we take a lot of responsibility for the things that we have in our closets.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Laurine Grere Osborne, as we know, Lisa introduced us. And we're all very familiar with the extreme textile waste and carbon emissions and resources used in the industry today. But it's also important to understand what happens when clothing gets purchased and we're donating. And when we make a donation, generally, we do it locally. You don't do a donation, you don't drive to Boston to drop off your clothing or go to the thrift store. And what happens is we all have very good intentions. So we go down, we get up, look in our closets, and then we decide, okay, we're gonna get rid of these things and we're donating today. But one woman's donation is another woman's treasure, because actually the limited amount of products gets donated is actually sold in thrift store. The remainder is distributed in different places. So today I'm going to take you through the journey of your donations. The picture on the right is someone carrying clothing in a market, in the biggest market of reselling, which is in Africa. So how do we, the different collection methods that takes place? You generally find you go to the charities, or you do street collections, which is the drop boxes that we have. You find them in the car parks, you find them on the side of the street, etc. And they all have advertising adverts on the top of them, what organization they belong to, and you willingly put your products in. The next is, then we have the take back schemes. You go to the stores and they somehow manage to put the take back box next to the checkout or close enough. And when you go in, they'll say you drop them off, and the stores will probably offer you a gift voucher or 10% discount. And that's psychologically designed. So you're giving something and you think you're getting something in return. And it's always tied to, well, I could buy something new. So it's a cycle. So although you're giving back, you're busy shopping for something new. There's other things like, I said, garbage. People just dump their clothes. And then there's fly tipping, which is the illegal dumping. But a lot of the percentages, as we talked about before, doesn't really add up to what you think you're doing with your second-hand donations. So here we have dead stock returns, and this is shrouded in our paid practices. I mean, what happens is the stock from the design studios, etc., the stores, they get returns. There's a lot of online now. There's a proliferation of online retail store returns, and those get discarded. Not everything goes back into be resold through that retailer. Some of the designers, a lot of the luxury designers will tend to, in order to protect their brands, they, at the end of the season, when they have excess stock, they'll destroy the stock so it doesn't get sold at in a sale capacity. Here we have the average 81 pounds of clothing gets thrown away by the average US citizen annually. That's just one person. You talked about the family, which is a bit bigger. And we have the same thing, 85% sent directly to landfill. And 15% is donated to the charity and recycling. So I'm going to talk about the 15% and that journey. So we've got the donations, and only a small percentage of the donated clothing actually gets resold. The other 80% gets taken, sent to the sorter, the grader, the broker, someone who's going to be selling this on to someone else. And this gets then broken down even further into domestic and export sales. So some thrift stores will go to the local thrift stores, might go to the exporter, to the grader to get high quality secondhand clothing. Some of the products that's not good gets broken down to industrial rags. So, you know, the wipers, they send them off to the mechanics, they use them to wipe oils, etc. So that's what your industrial rag is. Then we have shoddy stuffing, and that's when the products are no good, they get sliced and diced. And before they used to put them into mattresses, etc. But now we've moved on with the mattress story, and most people are using the foam. Memory foam. So no one's using stuffed mattresses anymore. So that's where that is. And then you've got 5% discarded into landfill or incinerators. And less than 1% is actually recycled fiber to fiber. That will take another presentation for us to discuss why that is, but it's a lot of the products that we're using today is mixed fiber. So it's either mixed with polyester, and cotton. It's a blend, and the technology is there, but it's very expensive to separate them when you do the recycling. So then we look now further to domestic export goes down to remake, and the products get exported to different parts of the world. And that 45% is remade, repaired or remade or dumped. We don't have the statistics because we just don't, of how much is dumped in landfill in overseas, global south countries. Okay. Who actually does the sorting and grading? So this is just a short, a snapshot of some of the big companies that are actually the brokers, the graders, the sorters, and it's a complex system that is working. So it's very difficult to trace who sells the final product. As you can see further down, there's a group of companies like HAYVN Global, and they've got 3 or 4 different companies, all geared to different parts of the world. So Inditex, they cater to secondhand clothing sourced in the US, but they're selling to the African continent, South America. They've got another one you can see where it's located in Poland. They're sourcing their products here in the US, but they're shipping them to Europe to be sorted. So therefore, the US is not really selling secondhand products to the global south. So it's a very complex network that's going on, and it's opaque. now we have the Smart Association. There's a group of people that, globally, that make up different associations for the second-hand trade. And if you bear with me 1 second, we'll rattle them off for you. Yes, so there are some larger players in the second-hand business, and some have very elaborate distribution methods. And from this website, I got a quote that they said, as a collective group, so there's the Secondary Material and Recycling Textile Association, which is a smart one, the European Recycling Industries Confederation, Textiles Recycling Association, and the Bureau of International Recycling, the textile division. And on their site, they've actually quoted as saying, as a collective group of used clothing and textile associations from various countries, we want to set the record straight and strongly encourage the world to consume used clothing and textiles. The used clothing industry has a far-reaching and positive social, economic, and environmental impact. Even the fashion industry is slowly joining the recycling trend movements. Other countries should also follow the trends now being set in African countries where reuse is more the norm. We should be advancing towards the same dream for circular economy, which is essential for the global perspective. Take a minute to take this in. They're encouraging that they are sending by bales of clothing that has only 40%, maybe less than 50% that's usable to these countries. So what they do, they cream off the crop when they're doing the sorting for the domestic market. So if you're in the US or in the European Union, the grade that you'll be getting, maybe it's AA, AAA. You could go on any of their websites and they'll be encouraging you to buy secondhand products. So for like yourself, you'll have, you buy a bale, your bale will probably have 100% resaleable items. The trader in Africa or any of the third world countries is getting a bale. They don't know what's in this bale, so they're buying blind. And so they buy these bales of clothing, but only 30%, 30 to 40% is usable. And that goes back to how products are being made now, as opposed to in the 80s or the 90s, where it was better quality. Your clothing is now designed to be worn, and by the time you've washed it a couple of times, it's no good. So you put it in the bin, or you drop it off at the Goodwill. And any of the other charities, and you think, oh, it's going to go to good use, but they ship what they can't sell to the graders, and they in part then ship it to a third world country where they are now lumbered with the goods that can't be worn, they can't wear them, and they have no infrastructure in order to discard of them, and so they're left to impact their environment. So our problem, our waste has now become their problem. So this has been an ongoing conversation, and the European Union last year has come out with a framework for how European countries should dispose of their waste. That allows for the problems that were just outlined shouldn't exist in Europe. In the US, we haven't quite gotten there yet. We're working on it, but there's no a framework of how the secondhand products get graded or what they can possibly export. So there's no restrictions. So as a grader, you could pack it up and sell it off. There's no come back to them. And a lot of the countries previously wanted to, a lot of the African countries wanted to ban the import of secondhand clothing. And the group that I spoke about before lobbied to say that this cannot be allowed, otherwise there'll be sanctions or fines, etc. With the trading with the US, mainly the US and Canada. So let's look at some figures, just slightly, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I say, for example, here, you'll see that Poland imports $158 million worth of used clothing. But on the other side, Poland exported $225 million dollars worth of clothing. We don't have the figures of where the 225 has gone to. It's gone someplace, didn't come back to the US, but they've imported 158 million from the US in 2021. And so that, from the data, you could pick anything that you want to, it's up to the interpretation, but that's something that you could look at and think, okay, this company is importing this much, but they're exporting that much. So the imports that they're getting is just showing you that the sorters here they'll collect the products from the US, send it to another country, have it sorted, and then ship it on to a third world country. So it's very, very complex. If only we could ban the importation of torn and stained clothing. Only in an unjust waste colonial world, the Ugandan importers blindly forced to purchase pairs of white shirts with yellow-green armpits. And this was just last week, because Uganda has managed to brought in the policy of banning imported secondhand goods. So, multiple solutions, complex problems. There's not one size fits all that we could speak to about how we can overcome this problem. But there's some suggestions, then we'll take questions from the online audience and from yourselves. But maybe you have some suggestions of what we can do. But as before, we talk about you buy less junk, you're able to repair your products, repair your garments. If I say to someone, do you understand the terminology? What is the darn a product? Here we've got a captive audience, but I spoke to a group of people a couple of weeks ago and I said, do you understand what darning means? And they said, darn?
I don't think many kids would understand that, right? Like, they've never seen anybody darning a sock on.
They thought I was swearing, and then I said, no, darning, repairing. And I thought it was just so funny that no one knew what I was talking about. And also, if you could have transparency within the supply chain of the secondhand product, perhaps at some point, the sorters, the wholesalers will have to come to grips with, we cannot sell blind to some people and to a group of countries and to others. They know they guarantee what it says on the label. And thank you.
Curious, and maybe for either of you, has there been much momentum on, getting the word out with, dare I say, an influencer network? Specific to, to the sustainability side of global clothing resale? I mean, the top of it would probably be, it wouldn't happen, but a Kim Kardashian for all the might. But that wouldn't happen, but someone like,
It happened.
it did happen? Oh, wow, okay, because.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah. Can I speak to that?
Yes.
Okay, are we being recorded?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right, great. Should I?
Yeah, you can say it.
From right here? Great, yeah, so Lisa asked a question about the role that influencers, like global influencers, play in the sustainable fashion space. And she mentioned Kardashian, so it's a great question. There are definitely a lot of, a number of celebrities, micro, macro, who are proponents of sustainable fashion, particularly in terms of reuse, rewear, recycle. They lean in heavily into like the vintage, basically into vintage clothing and like the thrift markets. But you mentioned the Kardashians. So last year last August, Kourtney Kardashian was announced as the sustainability ambassador to Boohoo, which is one of the largest fast fashion companies in the world, based out of England. And so this was a big boo-ha-ha, if you will, for Boohoo. It was fantastic for them because it gave like a big celebrity status to this effort that they were launching. Kardashian created a capsule collection of vintage clothes for Boohoo, but it also got a lot of flack because it looked like the ultimate in greenwashing, because the Kardashians are not known for being, shall we say, conscious consumers. Boohoo is not. Boohoo is kind of like a Forever 21 or an H&M or a Primark. So they're also not known for being very conscious or conscientious in the way they produce. And it became quite a hot topic, particularly for those like myself who were involved as consultants on this project. Yeah,
So it kind of deflated quickly.
it had some pros and cons. It was a touchy subject, which we can understand, but it got people talking.
Yes, for sure. I mean, it's kind of like the food sector. People don't really understand like composting as much, or with their food and throwing it away. But we do get EV vehicles and recycling, as we mentioned in the conversation. So it's kind of the same problem or challenge. What's the big picture? And it would seem like influencing is in the media, but that's kind of the big conundrum is influencing.
But one of the problems that occurs with the influencers is they feed into the fast fashion. They feed into taking pictures and showing that they're wearing different things. Going back, you never see a celebrity in the same clothing because it's not the done thing. And when they do wear something the second time around, it's newsworthy. It's like, who buys a dress for $2,000-3,000 and wears it once? And so they don't encourage that re-wearing, so they don't encourage to use your products over and over again. Every time you see them, they're always photographed in something different. And so if that changes, maybe they could influence the younger generation to realize that they can wear, you have something, you cherish it, you wear it. And as you get older, there's things in your closet that you're attached to. And it's the psychological thing that you say, it made me feel good, so I'm gonna wear it over and over and over again.
So the Oscars, they should have someone do all the clothing. That would be a great one. Like just take recycled clothes and make all the dresses for the Oscars.
They did that.
Right.
They did that at the Met Ball a couple of seasons ago. But there again, it was fancy
Right.
2-3 years ago.
Right.
The whole sustainable thing came up, and everyone was on the bandwagon about sustainable fashion, but how sustainable, as you said earlier, when you say sustainable fashion, you can't really say it with a straight face. Right.
But I
And the
think,
more you
I do want to recognize that there are so many organizations, nonprofits, celebrities, tastemakers who are trying to make to take huge steps in this space. I mean, there's an organization that is called, I think it's called Green Carpet, might be called Green Carpet Red Dress, or certainly something about green carpet. It is the brainchild of Ariane Phillips, who's the costume designer, to Madonna. She's won various Oscars, probably Tonys, Emmys as well. And that's a nonprofit organization started to encourage more sustainable wear on, on the red carpet and for galas.
It says Green Carpet Fashion Awards. So I guess maybe that's it.
It might be affiliated
Yeah.
with it. So yeah, then there are also celebrities like Emma Watson and Jane Fonda, Olivia Firth. I really want to give credit to those who deserve it. It is nearly impossible to make a lot of progress, particularly in our lifetime, but they are, by appending what is expected of a celebrity or of someone who is, who has eyes on them all the time. It used to be just a couple of years ago that if you were ever caught wearing the same thing twice, it was like you were like, sort of dead to the world of media. But now, I mean, we look at Kate Middleton, and she and many others like proudly wear the same thing over and over again. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like it becomes news, which it just shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be new.
Right.
And one of the things that I think is more important than saying, sustainable fashion is can people be more, of the companies be more transparent? If you're more transparent, you don't have to claim anything. You just say, listen, we're here, this is where we're at now. We don't have all the answers for everything, everything is not going to be, low emissions, good working conditions. These good working conditions apply for America as it applies to Africa, as it applies to Europe. And just be upfront about it. And people will say, okay, they're trying. But when they claim this whole conversation, we're green, we're sustainable, we're this, we're that, it leaves some people thinking, oh, why bother?
Okay. So I have a long question. I'm gonna see if they just wanna unmute and ask. Natalie, do you wanna ask your question?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Hi, Natalie Tallis. So this is going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm really interested in what you both have to say. As many of you probably know, there's a whole school of thought that believes, can everyone hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. That the only real solution for curbing fashion's impact on the environment is to buy less, period. And that by promoting resale, and right now it's very buzzy, tons of companies are coming out with peer-to-peer resale platforms and the idea of reuse and hand-me-downs. But really, the belief is all that does is give consumers another channel to buy more. And there's been no quantitative data that shows any company is actually selling less, even when particularly these companies that have their own resale platforms, right? They're still making the same amount. So what is your takeaway from that? And do you agree, disagree?
I really like that question. I appreciate that question. I think that in order to see significant change in the form of like statistics and data that point to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and essentially carbon offsetting that the resale market contributes, we're going to need critical mass, and we're going to need like long-term, a long-term shift in consumer behavior. We're not, you are absolutely correct. We're not seeing, we're not seeing the rise of resale curb overproduction or curb manufacturing. The large companies are not making less product. But I believe that over time, they will, as the consumer has more and more secondhand options.
But doesn't and this is something I argue with myself all the time, so it's nice being able to say it out loud rather than talking to myself. For the resale market to be successful, don't we have to buy clothes that we can then resell, right? Because there's a finite life cycle to any item of clothing. And for anyone who's used ThreadUp or the Real, they actually, much of it ends up, being turned into rags and not accepted. So it just seems like a false solution, but better than nothing. I just wonder how to make it work so there's true environmental impact. Did I get a question in there at all?
I was gonna say there's a segue.
But really about, does resale only exist?
We should answer this. I want to talk about this for 10 hours. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, but one of the things that we talked about earlier is making better clothing. But the fashion industry, we have maybe 200 seasons now. When I started in fashion, there was 4 seasons. And during COVID, didn't everyone manage without any clothes? For 6 months or whatever, the stores were empty, but they haven't run out of business. So it shows you that they can reduce the number of collections that gets put out for the consumer to consume. And if they make better clothing, then they last a bit longer. It's a no-brainer.
Except wasn't there a recent study that discounted that said it doesn't matter if something's made better, that it doesn't actually mean that it's going to last? Or no, you know what? You're right. It wasn't. It was if something's more expensive. That was the confusion. If something was more expensive, it didn't mean that it was going to last longer. So I'm incorrect. Sorry.
Is made better.
Yes.
And the jury is out on that. But I can speak to that and say, not really. Because it's expensive doesn't mean the construction is any better than something that you buy from one of the fast fashion companies. All it is that is the fabric might be a little bit thinner, but construction is pretty much the same.
So, thank you. I just, in the interest of time, I wanted, if anybody needs to pop off of Zoom, and this was just a really so interesting, so so thoughtful. I appreciate this, and we can stick around and keep talking here, but for the people online, I just wanted, and we'll have this.